third She Does Hang postcast with Anna, where you get to ask your questions. I'm Elaine, and Sarah's with me.
Hi.
And we have Anna Sale. If you heard the episode this week, you learned her story. But Anna, if you could just introduce yourself before we get started.
Yes, I am the host of Death, Sex, and Money, a show at WNYC, a podcast that started in May of 2014. And I just want to say I love the word postcast, and the She Does podcast invented it. So it's awesome. So excited to be a part of my first postcast.
Great. Thanks. So one of the first questions was, I don't think we talked, I know I interviewed you about this, but I don't think we included in the show. Someone wanted to know your average workday, like working in the NPR offices, what it's, how much interaction is going on and what your average workday is actually like.
Oh, that's a good question. So producing the show, the podcast, is much different than what it has been, what my workdays have been when I was a reporter, in that I have control over my schedule and my time and not being interrupted by breaking news in a way that is really nice because you get to sort of set your agenda. So because we're putting out shows every 2 weeks, basically there's the production week and then there's the off week, and it's the off week where there's the most production happening, where we're writing scripts, doing edits, listening through, thinking about music, going back and forth with the engineer, trying to make it sound just right. And then the Monday, our episodes come out on Wednesdays, so the Mondays and Tuesdays before a new show, it's a lot of polishing, writing web copy, thinking about social media, making sure everybody who's in the show is alerted, and that kind of thing. And then we start it all again on Wednesday 10 a.m. It's like, okay, now we got to make a new show. And then during that process of making shows, you're also thinking ahead, booking, thinking about the mix of the shows, and if we have this guest, this week, who do we want to, how do we want to follow that, and what's going to come, and what's the mix going to look like. But generally, I work kind of, I leave my home about 8:30, ride the subway, get to work about 9:15, and leave here typically about 6 p.m. So it's a pretty nice work day.
That's awesome.
You mentioned one thing, which was another question someone had, which is how you mentioned writing titles. And actually, we have been studying how you write titles for our show. How important is that copywriting element in terms of getting people to listen, and what have you learned in terms of podcasting tips? Because I know you have celebrity guests and average humans. So how does that copywriting work in the podcasting world?
Headlines are really, really hard, and it's not a skill I possess. So basically every Death, Sex, and Money episode name has been from another member of the team, because I will come up with something and they're like, that's shitty, that's terrible. No, my impulse is to always say name of guest on X, and it's just that's not provocative. So we try to in whatever way, we try to tell a little story in 6 to 7 words. You have a little sense of a narrative arc, to have a verb at least. When there is a guest who's well known, we include that name so that people who are searching, for that particular person will find the podcast. But it's how to grab eyeballs while also being kind of respectful of the person who's told their story in the episode, but not wimping out and not going for the sort of sharp angle and what we discuss. One I really liked, Songs in the Key of Strife is our most recent episode, and I just thought that was funny and brilliant. Chris Bannon, my boss, came up with that one. One that I think of a lot, Lawrence, who was the prisoner in Sing Sing, we called it I Killed Someone, Now I Have 3 Kids, and it's that's sort of blunt, and but it's exactly what the episode is about. So sort of what we strive for.
Awesome. Cool. Who is a guest that you're dying to have on the show?
who's the guest I'm dying to have on the show? It changes. Let's see. I mean, the first person you said that I thought was Bill Clinton. I don't think that will happen for quite some time, for obvious reasons. I think, I don't know, it changes. Like the way that I get inspired by people I'd want to have on the show, it's like if I'm watching old movies and I'm like, where is that person? What's happened in that person's life since they were so present in pop culture? Or it's like, so it's that kind of piecing together, and it's trying to find stories that we've sort of people we've forgotten about, or an experience that like you can't imagine. And that was what the Lawrence episode was. Like, what is it like to be in prison for all of your adult life and choose to have a family? So, but my dream guest, yeah, I'm just gonna stick with Bill Clinton for now. But there's many more.
Good one. I have a question. How do you, when you're interviewing your guests, how do you make them feel more comfortable? If you're, I mean, does it? I'm sure some take a little longer, but I mean, as far as easing them into that nice vibe with them. But yeah, do you have any? Yeah, how do you make them feel more comfortable when you're interviewing
I think
them?
something that's really key, and I learned this from reporting when I would do a lot of like, finding just people going about their daily lives during elections, when I would have to like pause them in their day, explain to them why they should talk into a microphone, and tell me how they feel about things. And it's just to at the very top, like introduce myself, tell me what I'm after, and tell them what I'm after in like really clear terms. So a lot of, oftentimes guests haven't heard of Death, Sex, and Money since it's new, and I said, this is the name of the show. From the title, you can tell we like to go at the issues that we don't talk about in polite conversation. But here's the way I like to do it. I'm really interested in moments of transition. I'm really interested in, how you figured things out. If there's a question I ask that feels too personal, this is recorded, so you can tell me, you don't want to go there. And to the extent that's possible, like try to make them see that they're like a co-author of this, like that we're telling this story together, and so to get their buy-in. And then the other thing about making someone feel comfortable is like eye contact, listening, like echoing back something they've just said as you're starting a follow-up question. So because often, if you listen to the radio, you'll hear so often hosts are thinking about like, I've got to get to this question, this question, this question, this question in the end of the segment. And I think that's because it's live radio and you have, a podcast, you have time. And so you can really sort of be reactive and responsive. And when people feel like you're listening, they will tell you more.
Right. And what do you find it's most difficult to talk? What do most people have a difficulty talking about? Death, sex, or money? Like, which one is the hardest to get out of people?
It's kind of interesting. Like, it very much depends on where people are in their lives. Like, sex, sometimes it's easy to answer in a glib way, but I just recently did an interview, and it hasn't aired yet, so I'm not going to tell you who, but there was a moment when it was like I was sort of asking a glib question, and he surprised me by saying, like, oh, like this is what the reality is when you're in your 50s and a man, and you realize your sex drive is not what it used to be, and it makes you feel like you're not a part of this energy that everybody else has been. And it was just like so honest and so like wow, particularly for like a man who was like a very masculine sort of virile man, to like be really honest about what that is like. It's not easy, but typically it's money. It's like and drilling down specifics on money. Like I'm still figuring out how important that is to stories, because I know I certainly want to know numbers, just to like. But also, when you start talking about numbers, you very quickly can get into a space where you're, I don't know, where it can be alienating for listeners. Like if it's so far outside of their reality, or so it's, everybody has it's similar set of feelings about money, but when you talk about actual numbers, it can very quickly start to feel like I don't at all relate to this person.
Yeah. And Sarah, don't we have a question on Twitter about numbers, sort of? Yes. Let's see. How have you made journalism a financially viable career? There's a lot of doom and gloom out there, and that's from Talia, actually.
Yeah. Talia, thanks for that question. I've been really, my particular path in public radio has been to always work for stations, and so I've never been a full-time freelancer. I think I have all the respect in the world for people who have made that work and who've been able to make their projects happen and find funding. I've always had salary and benefits since I started in public radio in '05, which I feel really lucky about. And I would say in this moment, if you're an ambitious audio producer, like it's never been better. Because for the first time ever, there's demand and the supply of talent feels like actually it's getting tighter because media companies that aren't audio native are realizing that podcasting is a space they want to get more into, and so I think it's like a terrific time to make money, and the prospect of like making not public radio money, like if you go the commercial route, is like just so weird. Like to think about like what does it mean if commercial production companies are thinking about podcasts as something they just want to produce? Like that's so foreign to my generation of public radio people who came up with a sense of like I work for nonprofit media and mission-driven media, and as a result of that, I have a certain set of expectations about how much money I'm going to earn and this comfort with how much money I'm going to earn, and that has a ceiling. I think that question is changing. So I think that's something for people to consider when they're thinking about how much money is important to them and what kind of audio production they want to do, because it doesn't just have to be not for profit public media anymore.
Yeah, and that we have a question from the chat right now, but I want to ask one follow-up to that, which is, podcasts are huge. We chose to do this format of interviewing women through a podcast because we felt it was the best way to get across the sort of nuances of what we wanted to do. But while they're big right now, like really, where do you sort of see it going? I know you can't predict the future by any means, but like I know you've been riding the wave before we were ever part of it, that's for sure. So like where do you see it going?
I feel like as more people learn that they can listen to whatever they want to listen to when they want to listen to it, we might stop saying the word podcast, but it's just going to be like people have a lot of time when they can have their earbuds in or when they're in their cars. And so I know in my own usage habits, like I used to just listen to broadcast radio all the time, and now, or listen to music on the subway when I couldn't get the signal. Now I listen to podcasts, and I if I'm not done listening to the podcast, when I get home and making dinner, I listen to that instead of listening to broadcast radio. So I think it's really changing people's behaviors, and it's still, you still have to know how to find a podcast. So there's still that, hurdle before I think there's full penetration. But like as people figure out how to do this more in their cars, and it's just going to be like, what do you watch when you turn on your television? Do you watch broadcast television, or do you watch the thing that you want to watch, and ingest 8 episodes at a time?
Yeah. Sarah, do you have a question before we go to this live chat question?
No, let's get to the live chat first.
Okay. So this is from Alex. He says, hi from Detroit. Do you have all your guests signed some sort of releases? And how many episodes ahead are you? He also asked how long on average does it take to produce a single episode, but we answered that previously, so you'll hear it in the postcast when we post this later.
Hi, Alex in Detroit. Let's see, the first question was releases. We don't do releases because it's journalism, so that's the answer to that. What was the second part of the question?
It was how many episodes ahead are you?
How many episodes ahead? None. If you mean how many episodes are done. Like our next episode our episode that's coming out next Wednesday, we're working on right now. I mean, we have interviews that we know, like, oh, we recorded that. That's going to be a fantastic episode. And when we get to the cutting and the writing, that one's going to be easier to produce, or this one is going to be more difficult to produce. But we have not successfully created any kind of shelf, except for the time when I went on vacation, and then we ran through it while I was on vacation. But I feel like I feel comfortable with that. I like doing the polishing and things right before it goes, so it can feel current.
And I guess that kind of maybe is that's why the every other week format works, whereas with This American Life, Ira has a team of people doing stories, so there's, different acts, but because this centers around you, you can only do so many quality episodes so often, so that makes sense.
Yeah, but hang on, my screen just locked up. I'm gonna re-sign in. Hang on.
We can still see you if it matters.
Can you see me? Oh
yeah.
My God, I'm trying to. This is not my laptop. There we go. Back. Yeah, I mean that's the other thing is when it's a host-driven show, an interview show. Yeah, there is a the limiting capacity is I'm not just doing intros and outros to stories, so that's doing the interviews is a lot of the production time, prepping for interviews, researching guests, that sort of thing. Yeah, so that's why every other week feels right now.
Yeah, I was another question that I had. What is we talked about in the episode with you inserting yourself and you as a personality, but as far as those little moments within each episode, for example, when Bill Withers kind of corrects you, that part, do you know that part I'm talking about, where he's it happens a few times, but how much do you decide to insert yourself, and is the team involved in kind of helping you check yourself, that's you were great here, let's keep you in, or maybe we should scale this back? What is that like?
Yeah, I mean that's a mix of in the moment decisions, and most often I'm doing interviews in studios, in which case I have headphones on and a producer is in the control room listening, and I have my hosting, the place where I have room for growth and improvement is I tend to ask a question and then I just want to hear the answer, and if somebody's just going and going and going, I will let them answer, and that comes from not wanting to talk over my tape from years of doing public radio. You sort of let somebody talk, and then you can go back and grab the soundbite that they say at the end of their long kind of wind up. Hosting is no, people are listening and they want to hear an exchange and an interaction. So what I'm continuing to learn is no, it's okay to interrupt. It's okay to and that sort of thing. And then so there's those choices in the moment in the interview, and then there's choices when you're doing the editing. And we'll look at a Pro Tools session, and if a guest, you see the two tracks, you see me and you see the guest, and if it's guest, and we talk about when we lose Anna, and so then it's figuring out how to reorganize it, so there's more of an exchange, so it's not just monologue of guest. So those are choices we make in post as well.
Yeah, that's cool. I like to hear that, because we're figuring all that out, because we're not primarily audio producers. This has been we're filmmakers, so we rely on visuals for a lot of the storytelling. So the host-driven thing has been a challenge, because I'm also used to asking a question and being silent while someone answers.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So which goes well with a question, which is that when you were designing Death, Sex, and Money, we just got another question as well, but when you were designing Death, Sex, and Money, what were you listening to as inspiration, and what books or tools or websites would you recommend to someone starting out in maybe a more narrative-driven show like you're doing?
Let's see. I mean, I just sort of I started listening to a lot of comedy podcasts, to listen to Pete Holmes, Mark Maron, Julie Klausner, to kind of hear what does it sound like, just get that informal tone in my head more, because I come from public radio, so that's not my it's not how I started out in interviews. Interviews in public radio are much more sort of structured and with a sort of heft to it. And I still listen to like Fresh Air to learn things all the time. But I listened, comedy podcasts were like, I just like want to get that in my head. And then it became like, is this, I mean, when I came up with the idea of Death, Sex, and Money, I didn't know it was gonna be an interview show at first. I knew I wanted to explore topics. I didn't know if it was gonna be kind of like, we have a death section and a sex section and a money section every show, or if it was gonna be, less literal and kind of more an exploration of people's life stories, which it's turned out to be. But I listened to so comedy podcasts, and then the question of like how to format and how much to edit and how much to track and how much music there was going to be. I mean, that was all, we're still sort of, I'm still figuring that out, but with one of the first episodes being on This American Life, I got to work with Jonathan Menjivar in editing the episode about me and Senator Simpson and his wife, and that was just like this awesome masterclass in narrative storytelling that I got to do while I was putting the show together. So I learned a lot there about also like writing between tape and how to set up the next section without giving away the next section, and just refining all those, those tricks, when to take a moment with pacing and say something big, when to let the listener just pause with music and let it sink in. But I think now Death, Sex, and Money episodes sound less like This American Life. There's less tracking than in some of the earlier episodes, and that's intentional, because more and more I sort of want the episodes to feel like the listener is in this intimate space with me and the guest, without a lot of like moments of like pulling them out, but kind of making it feel like this sort of place where we're all huddled together, kind of hearing these intimate stories.
I love that. And that actually, the next live question, Sarah, do you mind if I ask this? Or do you have something right now? Good. Do you see podcasting as having any history or lineage as sound art, such as radio drama, experimental recordings, etc.? Are you more influenced by film or by music when you create your pieces, or neither? That's from Jason McCool.
Hi, Jason. I would say, like, I've always been more, I always have come audio first, like music, when I think about mixing and pacing. I can remember when I first started in public radio and like realizing that I've been out reporting on something mundane like a legislative issue, and then that I got to come back and be like a DJ, and mix it just right and make it the transitions kind of work. And I have done television, but it's not natural to me. The visuals part, and I'm much more about the sound and the feel of the audio. But I think more, as podcasting becomes a thing that people think about as distinct from a radio experience, I think we'll start to think about like, oh, this is sort of interesting, the lineage it has with radio drama or other places besides just like a public radio, produced story. I think that's what's so exciting right now, is like there's so much room to mess with the formats that I came up with, which was like 4-minute story, 8-minute story if you're lucky. Now you can sort of break it all out and explore.
Awesome. Sarah?
Sorry. First of all, I wanted to say I love Marc Maron and Pete Holmes, and I think a conversation with you, like you being on Marc Maron's show or with Pete Holmes, that'd be the most fascinating conversation. But maybe someday. But I was wondering how if you weren't doing this show, if this opportunity hadn't come up, what do you think you would be doing right now? What would you like to be doing if this wasn't your show?
If I wasn't hosting a show and like making this show in particular, I would probably still be be reporting. And I covered news for a long time, but always my stories tried to get it these same questions that Death, Sex, and Money is exploring. So I would still be doing news, but probably trying to get at character in a way, like make people see. One of my favorite stories that I did last year, when I was covering, or 2013, when I was covering the mayoral race, was this day in the life of Bill de Blasio when he was a candidate. And I just remember this moment when we were in the car, and I'm the reporter tagging along with he and his aides, and we're waiting to go into an event, and it was rolling, and he just starts talking about television, and he starts talking about how he loved The Wire, and I was like, oh, who are your favorite characters in The Wire? And he said, Omar, because everyone says Omar, and then he said like Carcetti's aide, like the mayoral aide, who was like the operative, and it was just this like interesting, like that guy is your other favorite character in The Wire, and it was just said something about the way that he thinks about himself politically and how he sort of, is an operative first and a candidate second. So that's just like an example of like the kind of reporting that I used to love doing, which was like, who is this guy? And you think you know him, and let's catch him in these moments of like, that's not, what you usually hear when it's like soundbite tracking soundbite. But I love that kind of radio storytelling, and I loved news reporting. It's fun. You never know what you're going to get into.
Absolutely. We have a more nitty-gritty question about the recording device you use, microphones, headphones, all the types of tools and stuff that you like to use.
This is not something that I am like the expert on. When we do remote recordings, we will bring a multi-input sound devices recording recorder that's like a nice recorder that WNYC uses for live music broadcasts and things like that. So it's pretty nice. I always, as a reporter, just used Marantz's and that sort of thing with maybe 2 inputs. But we use this like fancier thing that the station owns. The kind of microphone definitely varies depending on what's in which studio, but it's all studio quality stuff, and that's the advantage of producing this show out of a radio station. I don't have to be an expert on the kind of equipment that I want to use because it's here.
Right, absolutely. And then there's one more about audio tricks in the field, avoiding noisy audio or situations or wind or different things like that.
I think it's just like wearing headphones. I mean, that's like, you just have to wear headphones when you're recording audio. And somebody, I think it was Amy O'Leary, like at a radio conference that I went to years ago, who's now at up where they used to be at the time and was at This American Life. But she just said, like, look, every time you show up to interview someone, show up with your recorder rolling and your headphones on, so that you don't all of a sudden look like an alien when you put your headphones on, but like that you look like an alien the entire time. So that's how they meet you. That's the way you're going to hear if there's an air conditioner that's too loud. That's the way you're going to hear if the wind is, hitting the microphone in a way that you wouldn't be hearing without the headphones. That's the way you'll hear if somebody's like banging on a table when they're talking. Like that kind of stuff when you're editing is the worst. And so, but the other thing to do is if you like have a big interview that you are just have to get really great audio, and you want to be fully focused on doing the interview, like if you have somebody who can be in charge of engineering the session and checking the levels and can bring somebody else along, that's just like another level of quality control that's nice to have.
And how do you balance taking notes and paying attention to that person? Any tips on staying engaged with the interview but making sure you're keeping your thoughts in order?
I actually don't take a lot of notes while I'm interviewing. Even when somebody's, like if somebody's in a studio and we're just connected and they're not there, I still don't take that many notes. I will like write down a word that they've said, and if I want to say it in my next question or something like that. But what I typically try to do is like go into the interview knowing the first question, knowing the last few questions, what I envision the arc of the episode being, and how, like if there's a delicate question, I will write out that question and make sure I know the words that I want to choose to use to to get at something in particular. But then once I'm in the interview, I don't really look at paper. I'm much more sort of think about like trying to see what the person is saying and see if they're getting uncomfortable or if they're like getting bored, like when I have to, speed up the pace of the interview, if they're getting distracted and that sort of thing. I do like to have a piece of paper that's like a timeline of somebody's life in front of me. I like to be able to see like, just like that's the year they were born, that's the year they, put their first album out, for example, that's the year that their mother died, just so I can constantly sort of be thinking like, oh, you're thinking about this, you're talking about this moment. So you were in your mid-30s when that happened. Like, God, you weren't a young, super young person. Like, you were in a place where you felt like your career needed to be taking off. Like, what did that feel like? Just so you can be sort of framing it narratively and putting it in context. And then the other thing I would say is like, it's practice, but like when you're listening, you're editing while you're listening, and so that's the thing that the other thing you should be concentrating on besides the next question you're going to ask. It's like, oh, that's the moment that could be the ender. Like I have that moment now, so I don't have to feel desperate like I'm searching for the ender of the episode because we got that golden moment of tape. My computer went away again, but yeah, that's what I would say. Okay, okay, great. But I don't want, like, doing this when somebody's talking, they're not going to tell you, they want to feel like you're listening.
Do you think that because you were a journalist before this and you were kind of out in the field asking people questions on the street or, in all different kinds of situations, that has helped you become more comfortable having these more intimate conversations? Because there is an art to it, like you said, and to be that prepared and like studied up on somebody and not have a checklist of all this stuff is like such a great thing to have harness. So yeah, do you think your background really has helped you in the sense of being comfortable with somebody?
Yeah, and I think in two ways. I think like being comfortable interviewing and like and learning about the ways like body language and what's not threatening and what's what an interview with an interview with me feels different than an interview with a more aggressive investigative reporter, and that's it's just a fact. Like I have a different style. My interviewing style is to always try to kind of draw out, but to not like to draw out to a point, but not to just like nod along, So, and I think that's from political reporting, which is when you had to be like, wait, you just said this, but like, what about this? And even if it's about something very delicate, like, I don't know if I'm following your logic here. Like, that doesn't sound like a kind thing to do, or whatever. Like, you just sort of can challenge somebody, and you have to challenge somebody if they're going to a place where you're just like, because the listener is going to be going like, you just lost me. I don't care about this person anymore. And then also covering in politics, you just have to ask the like rude question, So you can ask the rude question in a straightforward way that doesn't sound so rude. It's just like, I'm curious, like, what was that like when he committed suicide? You just have to ask it.
Awesome. Well, we're at 30 minutes, so we have more questions, but we're going to have to cut off here. Thank you so much. This was awesome. I'm so glad we got to dig into more of these things. I want to give you the last minute or couple seconds, whatever you need, to tell people where to find you, what's coming up for you, and anything they should know.
Okay. First of all, if you're watching this, thank you for getting to the end. I appreciate it. If you're listening, thank you for getting to the end. Death, Sex, and Money. You can find us in iTunes or your favorite podcasting app. Just look up Death, Sex, & Money, Death, Sex, and Money. I'm at Anna Sale on Twitter. The next episode I'm pretty excited about. It's a bunch of stories from listeners about cheating and being cheated on, and it's like tape that I haven't ever encountered in terms of the like feeling of like, holy moly, these people are really telling me things that that you just don't hear in public radio stories very often. So I'm proud of that episode, and that's coming out next Wednesday, which is the 25th. Is that right? Yeah, so look for it there. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And
Thank you.
I'll press stop broadcast now, but we can stay on if you want to debrief.
Okay.
So thanks everybody for listening.
Bye. Thank you.